Hey, it worked, Carly.
Yay! I had to jinx it,
It,
like
it decided
reverse.
it decided not to throw a fit today. Um, but well, welcome everyone to season two, episode I almost said 14. I said 13. It is episode 13 of Living in the Texas Hill Country. Today we are going to be discussing some pond vegetation management with I guess, is this the first time you've been introduced as Dr. Brittany Chesser? Do I get
Unfortunately, no, it's been a full month,
Oh,
so there's been a lot of, yeah.
okay. Well, so Brittany is actually so she's part of the extension family. And her I'll say official title is she's a aquatic vegetation management specialist. So she deals with, whereas I deal with things on land, she studies everything in the water in regards to plants. But you do a little bit of fish as well, but you focus on plants, aquatic
Yes,
plants.
I mean, there's a lot of interaction
But yeah,
between the two, so we always have to think about them. Yep.
yeah, it's kind of like range and wildlife, like they're so intertwined that it's hard to like, you really
Yep.
can't parse them out. They're just kind of stuck
I would
together.
like to say that's why we're all in a unit together. We have our range, we have our wildlife, and we have our fisheries, which does include aquatic plants. And, all of this water ties everyone in, all this movement with our natural resources. So it's very complex, that we each specialize in our own area, but it's needed, right? We all need to stay talking to each other.
Yes. I mean, I guess we'll just kind of dive in. So, um, what are some of like there's obviously lots of different vegetation types, but what are some common ones that are found in ponds?
Right. So there's over 800 species of aquatic or wetland plants here in Texas. So that can mean, plants that I specialize in are obligate plants. So these are plants that spend 99% of their time in the water. They like to get their feet wet. And then, of course, there's plants that maybe 67% of the time they're in water. And, as we get further away from a pond, we still have aquatic plants. They might be more like what we call facultative upland plants. And so there's a lot of different species. And so since there's so many species, we really have to figure out a way when we're talking to professionals, or teaching them or giving them professional development and talking with landowners. We really drive it home to try to get it into one of our four categories that we lay out. And so that is our algae. So these are essentially primitive plants. They're not going to have any seeds, roots, stems, okay, even though they might have structures that look like it. The second category would be our floating plants. So these are our true free floating. So this means they're sitting up at top of the water's surface. You can reach in the pond, grab the entire plant. It's not going to be connected to anything. So no water lilies would not fall into this one. Our third one would be submerged plants. So this is where most of that plant material is underneath the water surface. And so these are the ones that people often have issues with identifying. They're the ones that are a little bit trickier to manage because now you might be managing in several feet of water. Sometimes they have little seed structures that sit above the water's surface or small like leaves or flowers. But for the most part, everything is underwater. And then our last category is going to be our emergent vegetation, where most of that mass is actually above the water's surface on average. And so this would be things like our cattails, most of our grass-like species, and this also does include our water lilies. So all of our aquatic vegetation that we see in or around our ponds that like to be in water almost 100% of the time can be put into one of those categories.
Gotcha. And I can't help like you're sitting here talking about algae, and I just think of being a kid. And so Brittany and I are both from the East Coast because I think you're originally from Connecticut.
Delaware.
Delaware. Okay. So you're literally right next to me. So yeah, so I'm from Pennsylvania, and I just think of like being a kid and you just have the algae, and it's like that, like I guess it's technically algae. I know nothing about aquatic plants, but it's just like the slimy, like vibrantly green stuff. I don't know if we have this here in Texas. We don't have that much water down here, so I don't get to see
Yeah.
algae very much.
So algae is crazy because, I mean, there are tens of thousands species that can be described or are technically algae, true algae species, and we can talk about cyanobacteria later. But yeah, one of the groupings is filamentous algae, and that's what's also known as pond moss, pond scum.
Oh,
And I
okay.
probably have like 15 emails right now about people asking me about it. And it's something that most ponds have at some point in their lifetime. You're constantly trying to maybe manage it just because once it's there, it's always there. And, other management practices. So, like, say you have a true plant and you go in and, you can use a couple of different management methods, right? And it dies off. Well, when it dies off, those nutrients get released, and most of the time that filamentous algae pops up. And so, yeah, that is a huge problem here. There's so many species that we just kind of have to group them into a
Yeah.
subcategory. But yeah, filamentous algae, it kind of, when it gets to the top of the water surface, usually it's decomposing, and so it just looks like slime or snot. Yeah.
So that is something that the algae technically, when it's, I'll say, thriving, living, it is an obligate. Like, it's supposed to be under the water. You're not supposed to see it, but when it does come to the surface, it is ending. I'm assuming that's just part of the natural like life cycle. Like, it's at the bottom, it does its thing, and then it just comes to the top and
Yeah.
dies.
Um, so filamentous algae, that subcategory, when it's healthy, it's growing, it's active, it's going to be darker in color, it's going to attach to the pond bottom or any plants that are already growing, any substrate. Certain species can attach to your docks, your ladders. And essentially you're right, when it's in a life cycle where it's constantly booming and busting, and essentially, when we get to certain water temperatures or certain environmental conditions, it dies off. And so when it dies off, all of those cells that were kind of intermingled, and that's what makes filamentous algae look like filamentous algae. It almost looks like wet cotton or wool when you're pulling it
Yes.
out. Yeah. And so those kind of break apart, and those create these floating surface scums. So it's kind of really interesting because a lot of people think that these are, two different things when one's growing at the bottom and then once they start developing these mats. But really, it's something that they probably should have already managed or looked into managing. And it's kind of one of our initiatives with aqua extension, just because we do see the severity of these systems every year. And right now I'm getting photos. I'll actually show you one here to kind of show you the severity.
I was gonna say, and Brittany, if you haven't guessed, like, I am so easy. I get off track so stinking easy. It's
Oh,
not even funny. Carly's job is to keep me on track. We're still talking about things, but
yeah.
we derail very fast.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, this is the kind of photos that I'm getting this time of the year. And this is essentially a really shallow pond, so that, of course, doesn't help. Anytime that we have shallow or clear water, we're going to have more aquatic vegetation, and then you factor in the nutrients. And this is very common of what we see here in Texas, especially in our warmer months when that algae starts dying off.
Yeah.
So,
And that, I mean, that just reminds me, it literally, it just looks like grass. Like, those are the types of pictures that you think of dogs like not paying attention, and they just launch themselves
Yes.
onto the pond thinking it's a chunk of grass, and it's
yep,
not. They will sink.
exactly.
They will sink.
So, when you were a kid, did you used to take these and throw them at your siblings? Because I
Oh,
definitely did.
no. Like, this stuff, like, I just remember it grossed me out to
Yeah.
no end. And I think if my sister had thrown this at me, I would have gotten so mad. Like, I hated this stuff as a kid. It was disgusting to me. And I feel like it has a very distinct smell to it. Maybe that's just me.
Smelling
Maybe
it
it's
right
just
now.
the water. Like, it just, like, I don't know. I feel like it has a distinct smell to it. Or am I just crazy?
No,
Um,
I agree.
yeah, It does, but most of the time, that might not actually be,
Be
so it might be the algae dying off.
yeah.
Because if you actually take some of that healthy growing algae that's underneath, like if you've ever seined a pond or anything, it doesn't really smell like too much, but yeah,
Yep.
anytime vegetation is dying off in the
It's
water, it smells horrible. And then you have to think about, any of the muck and anything else that's decomposing in that water as well can definitely add to the smell factor.
I was gonna say, so I'm assuming you chucked this at your siblings when you were
Yes,
younger.
I did. Yes. Yeah, and actually, so maybe this is me being a weirdo, but if you like leave it obviously like on your skin or whatever, try to like cover yourself with it, I mean, you're gonna have some pretty irritated skin afterwards. So,
Oh, I had
Just
never thought
yeah,
saying.
about that.
yeah.
So were you trying to go like full camo? Like you're just like, I'm just gonna like, or was it just an accidental, like you just, I
We
think,
would try to like bury each other in it, like
That's
because we
fun.
would go in and we would take out those mats. So part of, our physical control, we would take it out and then we would kind of just like have someone lay down, like my little brother. I have five brothers, so
well, that, I mean, but that explains it. I mean, that is
yeah.
totally 100% like boys are like, let's just cover each other in some algae because that seems like fun.
Yeah, but it gets really heavy and really
Yeah.
hot really quickly. And since we're both from the Northeast, we don't think of things like fire ants, but quickly moving down to Mississippi, and discovering fire ants, most of the time they're right next to the pond, and so they love to get in those mats. And I actually have photos of them like almost using the mats
I
like
was
rafts.
I
Yeah.
was gonna ask if they would use them as a little raft to walk across because I mean it's literally like ponds like that or stock tanks. I mean it's just I mean
Yep,
they're light enough they just walk across
exactly.
it.
Yep.
Lovely. Okay. And now that we've, dove down that little rabbit hole, we'll get
Yeah.
back on track. Um, so I mean you had mentioned that this is obviously a problem right now that you're seeing, but aquatic vegetation, I mean, it is important in an
Yeah.
aquatic ecosystem. So what does it provide in an aquatic ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think some of the bigger ones, definitely reducing erosion. So when you first build your pond, okay, and if you just have all this bare soil, your pond's going to erode very quickly. And I mean, this just happens naturally over time, regardless. All of our ponds in Texas are man-made systems. And so as soon as we build that hole, they're constantly trying to fill back in. And so something I'm always trying to convey to our landowners is that your pond does have a lifespan, and depending on your rate of erosion, so this can be through wind or wave action, it can really decrease the life expectancy of your pond. Not to mention, when you have a lot of erosion and you have some very low grade slopes or some areas that really don't get to depth pretty quickly, we're going to have more aquatic vegetation there. And so, actually, by putting in aquatic vegetation like our shoreline vegetation, especially selecting for some of our native species, like pickerel weed, for example, that are really good at sucking up nutrients. So they also provide that nutrient buffer aspect and help preventing excess nutrients from running in the pond. But they also help kind of stabilize that soil. So maybe it's not affecting, maybe your aquatic vegetation issues down the road aren't as bad. And so it's kind of weird, we're using aquatic vegetation to prevent other aquatic vegetation problems. So there's that, kind of just to the structure of the system. But and then of course I mentioned nutrient buffers, but there's also these aquatic plants like our submerged aquatic vegetation that's underneath the water's surface. It provides area for things like invertebrates. So when we start talking about managing it for waterfowl habitat, we call them our little invertebrate factories because there's so much surface area on most of our species or the species that we're maybe trying to select for. And, that's great for our waterfowl. It's also great for our fishery as well. As we go up the aquatic food chain, we do have our forage fish, or bait fish that are maybe eating some of those really small invertebrates. And then we have some of our larger vegetation, like buttonbush that can be nesting habitat as well for waterfowl or other species. So yeah, we never want, my biggest thing is a lot of times I'm asked to come speak about control of aquatic vegetation. And so I always have to tell people, I'm not saying you should kill off everything in your pond or manage, not everything in your pond needs to be controlled, but we definitely need to look at, what it might be hindering or kind of the pros and cons of what is currently growing. And because there's a lot of benefits. And if you don't have any aquatic vegetation, um, you're going to run into some other issues.
And I was gonna say, is it even possible to keep aquatic vegetation from naturally finding its way into a water source? I mean, I feel like it's going to find a way, whether it catches a ride on, waterfowl or other, herons or shorebirds, or, you get a water event that sweeps, like down here in Uvalde where we had so much water. I mean, it's gonna end up finding its way in at some point in time.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty uncommon. I do have people who reach out who have a newly constructed pond, and they want to know what vegetation to put in there. That's really common, but again, it's usually like they just constructed it in the last like 6 to 9 months. Most of the time, though, when people construct their pond, they're bringing in soil from other areas, and that brings in some of our species, like southern naiad is a really common one, because it has little tiny seeds that are very viable in the sediment. And a lot of people are like, well, where did this come from? I live out in this dry area and I fill this water with my well. And then I ask them where they got their clay to essentially line their pond, and usually they've drug it in from somewhere else. And then of course, yeah, factor in wildlife, especially feral hogs, moving fragments, and yeah, very, very difficult. And most of the time, if someone doesn't have vegetation and if it's not a newer pond, it's normally because we're dealing with a turbidity issue. So maybe they have a lot of soil or sediment that's suspended in the water column, or they have something called tannins, which is essentially decomposing material that makes the water almost like a tea color, and it's usually acidic. Yeah, and we see these in northeast areas of Texas particularly. And so in those situations, sometimes I do see or get emails about, nothing's growing in my pond. Why is nothing here? And then that just goes back to the water clarity and some other water chemistry.
And
Yeah.
so and you kind of touched on this a little bit, I'm assuming even though a lot of these aquatic plants, even your obligate um, plants, they're probably pretty good at, even if the water were to disappear, they're probably good at staying dormant for many, many, potentially at least like 5 years. I would imagine probably even longer than that. And then the minute you get a little bit of water, they're like, oh, I can do what I need to do.
Yeah, so there's some of our shoreline vegetation is very good at dealing with drought, especially, or flooding. And so they can essentially move around by vegetative growth or fragmentation and establish in new areas that maybe have water, or maybe they're able to extend their roots out a little bit further to get some more resources. And so, yeah, very well adapted. Back to your point though, in terms of years, we do have vegetation. So like American lotus, the seeds of American lotus can remain viable for over 200 years in the
Wow.
sediment. Yeah. So, and that's just kind of the minimum. I believe that was the Smithsonian who went back in their records and tried to germinate them, and they essentially stopped after a couple of 100 years. And so they can persist a very long time. So there's, also that. And then, of course, like algae, cyanobacteria. They have spores in the sediment that sometimes even going through a drying period can help stimulate them when the pond has been flooded again.
That's so cool. So I guess let's let's get back on topic again because I feel like this is just one of those things where I feel like this just shows like how passionate we are about what we do and how we love our specialties. Um, but what are some like I'll say broad scale because I realize we don't have enough time to like dive into all
Yeah.
the management of aquatic vegetation, but can you kind of give us some like really broad like I'll say categories of management and then like just some of the really common ones that you see here in Texas.
Yeah, so I would say similar to our, managing a terrestrial weed, like a weed that's in your garden, we're gonna go down the line and try to pick a couple of different methods to maybe create what we call an IPM or integrated pest management strategy, because that normally offers a longer term approach. So we have our mechanical, which an example of this would be some of our large harvesters that you might see. They're a little pricey for some of our private pond owners. But they're really good when, a pond or a lake has been taken over with aquatic vegetation, and maybe we can't, or maybe we're a little bit more limited on either biological or chemical control. Physical control, going in, raking out the vegetation is one option. That's what I used to go in about every other week at our aquaculture farm ponds and remove the filamentous algae. And that's something that, is a temporary fix. You go in, you pull the weeds, you're not getting all of that. And so just expect to be doing that, like every other week. I would say one of the bigger ones, though, in terms of physical, or maybe you would put it under cultural control, would be pond dyes. And so these are essentially non-toxic dyes for your pond. Think of them like food coloring. And basically, they're effective on everything below the water's surface. So you can't expect to put a pond dye in, and it take care of your floating vegetation that's already there, because obviously they're above the surface, just floating there. They're getting all the sun they need. It doesn't affect the nutrients. It's literally just blocking light. It also won't affect your shoreline vegetation, but it will help with your algae, and it also help with your submerged vegetation. So that's one practice. You'll commonly see that in more recreational or aesthetic ponds, I would say. And then we are starting to see it being incorporated a little bit more into maybe irrigation or livestock ponds, because it is safe for irrigation and livestock. Um, Biological control, we do have a couple of biological control insects that are effective on things like alligator weed, giant salvinia, water hyacinth even, but none of these are produced as a commercial scale here in Texas. So we really have to rely on things like our triploid grass carp and tilapia. So triploid grass carp are really good at controlling soft submerged vegetation. And then our tilapia are better at controlling small floating vegetation or algae. A small percentage of their diet can be algae, so they can help with some of that maintenance. And so those are kind of the two big biological controls. And then, of course, the last one is chemical control. And so for some of our, species like alligator weed, which can become a really big issue, I actually have uh, a photo laid out for you guys of when aquatic vegetation, it really depends on what type of, what your goals are in terms of whether or not it's an issue. But for the most part, alligator weed, highly invasive. It is a non-native as well. So here's an example. So this was actually covering about 200 acres, just like this, constantly overlapping. So when we get down to it, um, our mechanical our physical control is going to be limited. You're not going to go in here and pull out 200 surface acres, because by the time you get done, you're going right back to the beginning. We can't get enough of the alligator flea beetle on a commercial scale. So you might be able to know somebody or get a small cup, but we're talking about a stocking density of tens of thousands to be effective on alligator weed. So when we get in situations like this, you're really going to be limited to like mechanical control, which I think would be a great option for this because we do not have a lot of leaf coverage. But in other situations where alligator weed is growing, most of the time we do have to go with something like chemical control just to get a handle on it and prevent some of these monocultures from causing more havoc. So that is a large component of aquatic vegetation management, and that's just because we're pretty limited.
Right. And so with all those different chemical methods, um, I'm assuming it's very much similar to like terrestrial herbicide treatments. Like you need a lot of those that you're going to recommend. You're going to need like an applicator's license for those, or is it slightly different?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. So we only have, okay, so we have 15 active ingredients that can be labeled for aquatic use here in Texas. So that means that you can't just go in your shed and get your what you're spraying your fence line with or your garden. They must be aquatically labeled, and this is at the federal and then also at the state level. So within those 15 active ingredients, again, some of them might be familiar. For example, um, let's just talk about 2,4-D. 2,4-D is commonly used in a terrestrial setting, but we're gonna have different trade names for our chemicals. So you're still gonna have to look for that aquatic use right at the top of the label. And 2,4-D is actually our only active ingredient that can be aquatically labeled that you would need your pesticide applicator's license to buy certain quantities. That's our only restricted use pesticide that can be aquatically labeled. And so if you buy certain quantities of dry or liquid products, you're going to have to show your license. And so all of our other active ingredients, you do not need a license, but you should always be taking records. And then, of course, where you're treating and how much you're treating could dictate whether or not you need to go. So if it's like with public water, you need to go through TPWD and go through a treatment proposal management plan. And then if you're treating public water that or private water that is above a certain surface acreage, then you're going to have to go through TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, for particular permits for that area. So once we get into water and water rights and what you can do, it gets a little
Bit.
complicated, and that's why um, in my role, we focus particularly on private ponds. So they are privately owned. And a lot of people think this is really niche. And this is me going off on a tangent, but we uh, have an estimated of over 1 million ponds here in Texas, privately owned ponds. So even though, that's something that people might say, oh, well, you only work in private ponds, we stay busy. We stay very busy. And our landowners might not have a background in this. There's not going to be any, monetary help from government agencies to manage it. And so we have to work with them on their goals, their budget. But yeah, most of the time, I would say most of our ponds that we deal with are about an acre or so. And so as long as they're privately owned, and if they're not using 2,4-D, no, we don't have many regulations or limits. You just got to follow the label. The label is the law on the whatever herbicide or algicide you're using.
And I guess it's probably, and this is me 100% speculating, is it because a lot of because so many things use water, like it is one of that like vital things, and I feel like a lot of the stuff in the water is very sensitive to stuff. And it's just in such a sensitive environment. So a lot of the herbicides that you're using are probably they get the job done, but they're not quite as, I'll say, potent as a lot of the ones that you can use on the terrestrial. I don't know. That's my little side tangent or thought
Yeah,
on that.
no, so you're going along the right lines. So most of the time we have very similar, so like if you look at triclopyr, for example, that's one of our active ingredients. So if you look at triclopyr, what you're using in a terrestrial setting, what you're using in an aquatic setting, you're going to see that active ingredient is probably like 40 something percent, maybe 30 something percent. Okay. And so there's other things that are added into that formulation. And then that's where the big difference is between terrestrial and aquatic. So that's why you might see some overlap with active ingredients. But you are right. I think there's over 200 or so active ingredients that are approved for terrestrial use. And we're pretty limited in aquatics because we're not grandfathered in. Um, we have to go through about 10 years of testing through the EPA just because we're really concerned. When we're adding it in the water, we're really concerned. We want to know how quickly it's dissipating, how it's breaking down essentially in the water. Is it going to break down via light? Is it going to break down from certain water chemistry? And, does it bioaccumulate in any of our animals? Because obviously we don't want that to happen. And so all of our aquatically labeled chemicals or active ingredients that we can use at the labeled rates are safe for fish. So that's why if you look at water use restrictions, you're going to see that there aren't any as long as it's aquatically labeled and you're following the label and paying attention to things like temperature and not treating too much at once, then it is safe for fish. So
Right.
there's a lot of nuances.
Yeah, right. I realized, yeah, again, I literally dove into the deep end on that one. But I guess kind of speaking of like talking about like spraying, let's talk about like water quality a little bit because obviously, that's kind of related. That's my transition is, water quality. Water quality is something that I think a lot of people, you know, obviously worry about. So what are some like factors that can influence the water quality of your ponds?
Yeah, I think the biggest ones across the state of Texas. So, what I see in our aquatic diagnostics lab, we have obviously a nutrient surplus issue. So, I would say that's the number one thing that's affecting our ponds, whether it be runoff from surrounding fields or surrounding turf, urban areas. Any of those nutrients that are running off from your watershed into your pond are the biggest factor in terms of what's growing there, the maybe excess that it's growing in. Other things I would say would be development, especially development that's happening again in your watershed, mostly upstream. We have people who have had perfectly functioning ponds that they're happy with it. Maybe they have a system down. Then they have a development that is happening upstream. And next thing you know, their pond is muddy for an extended period of time, which can shade out your aquatic vegetation, which can lower or cause some dissolved oxygen issues. It can cause some issues in terms of just having a productive fishery. So your fish are going to have a lack of food. And then all of those also kind of play a role into um, some of our other water chemistry parameters. So things like total alkalinity. So that is the buffering capacity of your water. Okay, so if you have rainwater that's coming in that might be slightly acidic, we're hoping that you have some buffering in your pond, that you have enough alkalinity or enough carbonates to kind of help so you're not seeing a rapid decrease. Or maybe, you're not seeing a rapid decrease or increase throughout the day. Kind of going into the weeds here a little bit with that,
No
but
pun
that
intended.
affects it. Yeah, so exactly, pun exactly intended. It's, all of these things kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. It's really hard when somebody's like, so I'm having issues with my pond. Like, can you help me? And then I'm like, okay, like here, now connect these, draw the line, you know what I mean? Biggest one I would say eutrophication from runoff, surrounding nutrients. And that can impact a lot of other things that kind of we just get the ball rolling from there. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and so I guess what is some like other like common, so you said that's probably the number one issue. What's something else that um what are some other like common questions that you get asked a lot? Obviously, vegetation, but anything else that are some common questions that you kind of want to, do a mass shout out. It's like if this is, this is your problem, this is, I hate to say a quick fix, but this could potentially be a fix for you, which I realize across the state is kind of a challenging to do because every region has its own specific common issues.
Yeah, I would say one that I commonly get, especially when I'm going around the state at programs, just because I'm usually talking to a lot of ranch managers or farmers, um, and they'll show me a pond that they've had for a really long time to help water their livestock, and it's 100% covered with aquatic vegetation. And they're like, okay, what can I do? I really want people to kind of going back to that piece we talked about a little bit earlier, that, your pond does have a lifespan, and eventually, no matter how good of a steward you are, no matter, what you're doing, if you're not going in and reworking your pond is slowly going to become a wetland. And so, something that I'm dealing with is let me get a good example of this up and show it for you guys. So I'll get a photo like this, okay? And I'll get asked, and sorry, Carly, if you've already heard this in one of my programs, but
I have not heard this yet, Brittany, so go ahead.
okay. So, essentially, somebody will send me this photo and they're like, what chemical can I apply to this? And I can give you several recommendations, but just know that at this point, so knowing your species, so this is American lotus, okay, so we have that ID. ID is the first step in management. But one of the parts of identifying your aquatic vegetation is knowing the area that it grows in. So American lotus is limited to 5 feet of water about maximum. And so when we start seeing 100% coverage or close to 100% like this, we know that you have a very shallow pond. And so just asking for chemical control is really just slapping a band-aid on it, right? We can go in, we can chemically manage this, but the pond is so shallow and you obviously have nutrients and you're going to have more after you kill it off. Okay, all those nutrients are going to be put back into the water or the sediment. Just know that something else is going to establish, and it might be something maybe more invasive because our invasive species love disturbed areas. And so I think that's my biggest thing is having our landowners or pond owners think a little bit more long term. And we are seeing this more just from when I first started 7 years ago to now. But it's still a pretty common question, like, what chemical can I put on this? And so, yes, I do agree we need to manage it so we can get it back to how you want to use your pond. But we also need to think, okay, why is this here? Maybe you need to start thinking about reworking your pond, contact NCRS, so our Natural Resource Conservation Service. Sorry, blank there for a
That's
second.
okay. I'm always like NRCS. I always say NRCS and I'm like, I know what this stands for, but I use the acronym.
Yeah.
So I feel you there. I feel you.
Yeah. So, we have a lot of acronyms here in
Yeah.
Texas. And so I would say that's my biggest thing, is kind of looking forward, looking at different ways you can manage it, as well. And something that is a little bit more up and coming in the aquatics world, and something that people are really getting interested into, is looking at nutrient binding agents. So maybe early in the year, before your vegetation has taken off, all those nutrients from the previous year, okay, have just kind of settled back down to the sediment. Once water temperatures warm up, algal spores, things like that will use those nutrients. And so maybe addressing them at the beginning of the year or maybe after you've done a treatment, using those nutrient binders so those nutrients are no longer available. And then another one that really we're getting a lot of interest in, and there's a lot of products out on the market, and unfortunately, they don't have to be verified or approved by anybody. So it's kind of like the Wild West out here, would be beneficial pond bacteria. So I like to give the analogy like, you take probiotics for your gut health. Your pond is essentially the same. Your pond has beneficial bacteria that help it operate. And those beneficial bacteria can outcompete algae species, can help lock up those nutrients during our warmer times of the year. So maybe our aquatic vegetation can't utilize them.
Feel like after this, I'm like, aquatic systems are way more complex than any terrestrial ecosystem out there because I mean, you're working in so many different planes versus it's like terrestrial. It's like it is one plane and that's it. But you're just, yeah. So I applaud you
Oh,
for
thank you.
for all the different like factors that you have to think about with aquatic management.
Yes. Yes. And
Absolutely.
it's something I definitely it's really interesting to talk to people. Like I love talking to you guys about this because like I just think it's so fun and kind of to take it from, most of the time I'm talking to someone about one particular plan or one particular situation. And so to kind of pull back and look at
Yeah.
it from a broad scale is always fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess Carly, do you have any like last questions? And then we'll get, I guess, Brittany to like share some resources because we did not even like skim the surface of everything, all the knowledge that she has accumulated. We have barely skimmed the surface.
Yes, I would love like a 3 hour just deep dive as much as you
Just
can. And I think even then, I mean, like you said, you have a whole set of degrees in this topic. So yeah, it would be days worth of knowledge if we could. But yeah, so I guess with that said, since we don't have days to talk about it, is there anywhere that people can go if they have some specific questions or if they I know you have some webinars. Do you have anything coming up soon that people might be interested? Let me
Yes.
reword that people might contact log into and watch.
Yeah, so okay, I'm gonna go over like a little 5 minute spiel because we do have a lot of resources
mm,
and I want people to utilize them. So here's kind of just like a screenshot. If you use the QR code, it'll actually take you to all of our aqua extension, which is aquatic vegetation and then also has a fisheries component because like we talked about earlier, they really go hand in hand. And so you can scan that. And it takes you to everything we're about to talk about. Um, we do have a website, so that's aquaplant.tamu.edu. And so to kind of drag away from that, here's our Aquaplant website. And so you can click on identify a plant. It breaks it up into the 4 different categories that I mentioned. So if you're trying to figure out maybe what plant you have or just maybe thinking, should I manage this? Let me get some more information. You can go to it, and you can actually compare it to some of our photos that we have and like switch through. And then have some general characteristics that if you really want to like nerd out, I don't recommend measuring duckweed to a tenth of an inch. If it's less than a half inch long, it's probably duckweed if it's floating. And then at the bottom of each of these profiles, we have a how to manage this plant button. And that takes you to our physical, biological control. So you can see here, we mentioned tilapia. Again, they love floating vegetation. And then we have our effective active ingredients for that particular vegetation. So you can read so you can read more about maybe how this active ingredient acts, common trade names that are available for that active ingredient. So if you want to look at a label beforehand, and that way it also helps you because when you go to your local um, farm or feed store, not all the time do they know, what's essentially aquatically approved. even though they should be looking at the label, but this will give you a little bit of a cheat sheet. And so kind of going back to home, if you click this aquatic vegetation fact sheet button, it takes you to our list of fact sheets that we have, and they cover a lot of different topics that have been kind of random, just in terms of if I've gotten a lot of questions or maybe a special project. And so one of the ones that has been really useful or we've gotten a lot of feedback on
Mm.
is a landowner's guide, so aquatic site visits. So if you just got a property or if you're revisiting your pond and haven't put a lot of work into it and maybe want to reach out to someone, really my best piece of advice is to know your pond. So know your acreage, know your average depth, maybe your water chemistry, surrounding landscape. And so it kind of goes through a checklist of maybe some things that you can do yourself, or maybe send in a water sample to the lab, and then it kind of sums it all up at the bottom. And this will help you kind of give a good snapshot to send to your local county extension agent or a specialist, or if you're working with a pond and lake management company, giving them this information will put you a little bit of a step ahead in your management plan. Sorry, I told you I had a 5-minute spiel. This
Hey.
is the the aquatic herbicide table. So if you are using chemical control, we have all of these active ingredients that can be labeled for aquatic vegetation or aquatic use. Up at the top, we have a lot of our really common aquatic vegetation groups, and then we have ratings in terms of how they're going to respond, or how those plants are going to respond to that active ingredient. So G would be good. E would be excellent, which is normally the recommendations that we try to give. P would be poor, so we would want to stay away from those. On the third page, again, we have these examples of common trade names. We try to update these every few years just because patents run out, names change. And then what's really useful is, of course, with any chemical that you're using, there might be water use restrictions. And so this depends on your primary uses, your secondary uses, anything that you might be using that pond for in the immediate future. Because as you can see, something like Amazapure has a 120-day water use restriction for crop or turf irrigation. Makes sense. You're dealing with herbicides, but sometimes that's overlooked. And you can see that, livestock watering is another big one. One of our common herbicides, diquat, does have a 1-day water use restriction. And so you have to factor that into your management plan. Okay, what alternative do I offer? Sorry, this keeps popping
I was gonna
up.
say, I will say, and I think pretty well, Brittany, you've done a lot of this, like you've had Todd's help, but you've put a lot of this together. I hate to say by yourself, but you put a lot of this together. And I think like I don't know, Carly, how you feel. I feel like we have like one of the best like pond or aquatic management teams like in the nation,
Absolutely.
to be 100% honest. Like I
Oh, I
realize I am
appreciate that.
100% biased with this, but I feel like between you and Todd, like we have like one of the best teams in the nation. I would strongly put y'all up there for
I
nomination if that's a thing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, like it really just depends on, I would say a lot of our fact sheets, and a lot of our outreach materials are driven by questions I get, and definitely a collaboration like Allison Lund, with
Mm.
NRI. She had a project for I think her master's that she needed to complete, and this is a topic she was really interested in, so kind of gave her a start with resources, and she put this whole creating a buffer for Texas ponds. And then, of course, Todd adds in like that fish
Mhm.
element that we always need. And so this one's interesting if you're trying to establish a buffer.
Mm.
And what I really like that Allison did, and you have to remember, Allison's not, this isn't necessarily her discipline. So I thought it was really cool that she added in some information that I probably wouldn't have thought of, like hardiness zone for this
Mm.
map, and then, or sorry, for this chart. And then also she added in some information on like attracting butterflies. And so this is kind of a cheat sheet that if you wanted to start establishing a buffer, some species that you might want to plant. And then the biggest one uh, that a lot of people have questions on is cyanobacteria. And so this one was a little bit lengthier. And just through the Aquatic Diagnostics Lab, Todd and I get a lot of questions about blue-green algae, which kind of, even though it's a cyanobacteria, not a true algae, it falls under algae management. So that falls under me. And then Todd dabbles a little bit more in like the toxins, what that means for fish. And then we actually collaborated with Dr. Hairgrove on this, so he could give
Mm.
us a little bit more detail and maybe some of these graphic photos about if you were to look at certain structures from livestock and do a necropsy, how we could tell if it was a death attributed to cyanobacteria. So all of that to say, we have a lot of resources going back to this. We do have a um, webinar series. And so you can go to our Aqua Extension events and learning, and it'll take you to our upcoming events. But don't worry if you missed any that you're interested in. We do have a list of recording, recording webinars or recorded webinars that you can access. And then we have pretty much all of our upcoming Aqua Extension webinars for the year. So tonight I'm actually
Oh,
talking about identification and management. So trying to cram that into an hour and a half, and hopefully not get a bunch of questions about plants that I haven't talked about. But we do have one coming up with cyanobacteria, and that's always been a hit. And so if this is something that people are interested in, on our Aqua plant page, you'll see a little blurb about our newsletter where you can sign up. And you'll receive 2 emails from me a month. And usually that just goes over our current webinar. And then also some cool stuff, like we had a really cool case of a water trough that was purple.
I didn't realize that
This,
water could turn purple.
yeah, so
That's
this
cool.
yeah, essentially it could be a couple of different things. So we go over that. But it all just goes back to bacteria. So there's some really cool stuff. And then if we have any extra programs, and so we always try to put in like a little fun bit to make it worth your while. And anytime we have fact sheets that we're putting out, I know we're gonna have one this month, Pond 365, that goes over looking at different water temperatures, what you should be doing when you hit different water temperatures based on your goals. So we'll pump those out. You'll hear from us first. So that's my spiel. We have a lot of stuff. Like I said, I've created a lot of work for myself in the past 7 years. So it's always fun.
But that's why between you and Todd, y'all are the best.
A
So,
dream team.
yep,
I
dream team,
appreciate that.
dream team. But I mean, Brittany, is there any like other last minute things that you wanted to like bring up or anything or say before we wrap up today?
I would say one of my bigger initiatives this year is don't be scared of your water. Don't be scared to play, have fun, use your water, but get to know your pond, get to know what's going on in there, learn a little bit more about maybe warning signs, read our cyanobacteria fact sheet, and get those warning signs so you can enjoy your water. Nothing hurts me more than when somebody has a pond, because I don't have a pond. I'm not lucky enough to have a pond. But nothing hurts me more when people say, I have this pond, but I'm scared to use it, or like I'm scared to have fun in it. And I do think, there's definitely a little bit of risk, but there's a lot of reward, and it's one of the ways that you can connect with nature. So,
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, even with habitat management, it's really hard to mess stuff up with just like doing one little thing. Like one little thing isn't going to, not all the time, but generally speaking, it's not going to be the end of the world. And don't be afraid to just try it because
yes.
you bought the property for a reason. Enjoy it.
Yeah.
enjoy it.
Exactly.
But all right, Brittany. Well, thank you for spending your lunch hour with us today. Good luck tonight. Not that you need it. I'm sure
Thank you.
it'll
Thank you
be
guys
great
for
for you.
having me.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely,
thank you.
absolutely. And we will see y'all next Tuesday. So bye everyone.
Thank you.